movies in which there's white walls and the whole kind of commercialization, I thought it'd be interesting to get what the critical friction between all of us and the artist in Rome. Dawn Clements, you can read on the press release, she lives in Brooklyn. She was born in Massachusetts, correct? Mm-hmm. Massachusetts, and we've actually been friends since 1977. So in 1978, she did a woodcut, which I still have, of my silk screen of my unusual profile, and we've been friends since. The life of a dealer, I think, is very unusual in that it has recurrences and lapses. I can think of paintings that I saw. I can think of when I was 22, I would have lunch with this small Matisse painting from 1903, a beautiful head of a girl, and I was at Knoedler, and then the painting appeared 5 years later when I was working with Picasso's at Creuset, and then again at auction, and another time, and each time it's like revisiting the artwork, but I'm a different person. Likewise with Dawn, I've seen her work develop over the years, and as an art dealer, I had really the privilege of seeing a work that she did, which was a 75-foot drawing, which I showed to a collector in Washington who has since founded his own museum, but we literally had to unroll this work on the sidewalk in Manhattan in order to see it. So by way of introduction, Dawn has been here for 2 months. She is in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, Princeton Museum. Saatchi has been collecting her work recently. And it's been a real honor to see her working day by day. So, Dawn Clements.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to be in Rome.
I wanted to mention that part of the reason that I think I'm so attracted to being in studios of artists is that when I was a child, I would go visit my grandmother who was a painter, and they ran out of rooms, and I would always sleep in the studio on a couch. And I loved seeing the work develop on a day-by-day basis. So sometimes there would be this absence of the day, and then at night I would see a painting. And I think that's a little bit of what I've gotten seeing your work develop. But I wanted to talk to you, when you were a child, I'd been to your family home. You were first assigned the dining room. You had 3 brothers, and with your parents, and you had the dining room until you became a certain age. And then you were given a room in which there was a dormer that was almost above your head with wallpaper, and your parents gave you the permission to draw on it. Is that right?
Well, they didn't really give me permission to draw on the walls. But, you know, it was a very small house, and there were my parents, and then my 3 brothers, and me. And there was a certain, you know, I reached a certain age, and I was a girl. I was the only girl, and they decided I needed a room of my own. And so they gave me a room up in the attic, and it was, you know, it was a nice attic, you know, but it was old, and it wasn't really that finished, and the wallpaper was a little bit water stained, you know, and to tell you the truth, I just started drawing on the walls, just from things I heard on the radio or things that I really mostly, you know, the time of day and what was playing on the radio, maybe some graffiti, but no one really noticed, you know, and so I really wasn't given permission. But you know, at the moment that they understood that I was drawing on the walls, they didn't mind too much. And my father was an artist, so.
But when they moved from the family home, didn't your mother call you and ask if you wanted part of that, because it related to your work?
Well, yes, that's true. It's a very funny thing because. You know, it's just one of those things that I did as a teenager, and then many, many years later, it must have been 20 years later, I was, my parents were moving out of our childhood home, and at that point I was doing work in which I would do drawings that were images of, you know, of still life, but I would also incorporate text in my work of ambient sound from the radio again. And my mother said, called me up and she said, you know, Dawn, we're moving, do you want the walls? And I said, the walls, and she said, yes, because it seems to me that the walls are very much like the work you're making now. And it's interesting because, just this graffiti that I did as a child sort of became a big part of my work as an adult as well. And somehow I think that, we're always growing as human beings and changing, but there's always some kind of core that remains the same. And I think that's definitely true of what I do.
I'm interested in your relation to your father, who was an artist. He had a studio in the basement, which I saw many, many years ago, and it made a huge impression that he said to me, I do 10 drawings a day. I don't do 9, and I don't do 11. And I thought of that recently because the genesis of this piece, the hyacinths, is really reminiscent of that in a certain way. What happened was I had bought a tiny little hyacinth bulb which started to bloom, and Dawn did one vertical panel at the bottom, and then without realizing did the panel above it, without realizing that it connected, and then the one to the left, and then made sort of a promise, almost like a conceptual treatise with herself, that she would do one a day for the entire time she was here. It seems reminiscent of your father in a sense, no?
I think it's true. My father just, passed away a couple of years ago, but I remember growing up with him. He was, he went to a job every day, a job he didn't like very much, but he would come home at night and he would go down into the cellar, and he wasn't a very social man, and so in a way, the ways for me to visit with him was to sit on the cellar steps and just watch him painting and drawing. And so that was a kind of way for me to be with my father when I was a child, was to just sort of be with him in the studio, and I was quiet, I wasn't there to play with him, I just remember sitting on those cellar steps. And there was a certain moment in my father's life when he was somewhat depressed, and especially about the job that he didn't like. And he decided to quit painting. But he felt that someday he might want to paint again, and so he made a decision to make 10 drawings every morning before he went to work. And they weren't big, elaborate drawings. They weren't what you might consider highly finished drawings. They really were just sort of very repetitive, drawings that maybe took 20 seconds each, But somehow to him it was very important that he stay in this practice, and really every day for 35 or 40 years until the day he died, he made 10 drawings every day. And like you said, but in a funny kind of way, the drawings what the drawings were didn't matter to him. It really was just about keeping that motion active. And eventually he did, return to painting. But I did think about that when I was doing this, because this is a strange drawing, because I started drawing this and I really got very sick of doing it very quickly, because there was a lot of detail and I experienced a lot of fatigue when I was drawing. I was really kind of lazy. And so I thought, I gotta find some way to change the energy. And so I said, I'll start every day by doing 1 drawing a day. And that's how this started.
I'm intrigued though, because these hyacinths bloom and they die so quickly, that for the longest time I couldn't figure out what you were doing and how it related to Rome. But in the end, I thought about it. It really is about decay. If you look at the bottom, it's the plants are in full bloom. And as you move up, they really are dying. And it seems your work has a lot to do with temporality.
That's for sure, yeah.
But does it seem, getting to the art of Rome, obviously you seem like almost like Proust in the sense that, you could put Proust in a war zone and he would probably, write about the trench that he's in and the tea he's drinking. And I felt the same, that you came to Rome and there are all these, incredible distractions, but you focused on these particular projects. What made the most impression in Rome? Are there certain moments? At the Capitolia that evening, I'm thinking of, when we saw this, gigantic head of Constantine, or Palazzo Massimo, seeing, Livia's room.
Yeah, seeing Livia's room at the Palazzo Massimo was huge for me. I mean, that room that is a garden, I mean, it's a Roman fresco of a painting of a garden, and yeah, and I took a lot of photographs when I was there, not just of that room, but of the other Roman wall paintings that really moved me. I kind of knew that before I came here, that I was very interested in the fresco paintings. But something really funny happened to me here is that, I mean, I'm American, and in America, nothing is very old, I mean, we think of things as being old, but they're maybe from 1900, That's old to us, So, my idea coming to Rome was that, the Renaissance and the Baroque, 16th century to me sounded very old, But coming to Rome, it was strange because it didn't feel old anymore. In the presence, there's just this visible presence of the ancient everywhere here, and of all the strata of life, that I just found that after just moving through Rome, that suddenly the Renaissance and the Baroque felt very modern. That it felt technological, that perspective all of a sudden became something that was a technology.
And speaking of perspective, in this piece, in the front, it's almost like a Baroque vanitas, this kind of... Can you talk about, you've talked about a pearl a little bit, about the placement of the viewer in relation to the work. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Pearl?
Well, you were talking about, there's...
Vanishing point?
The vanishing point and the placement of the viewer in relation to the depth. Well,
that's sort of getting involved, but with this particular drawing, I was thinking about perspective, and instead of in traditional Albertian sort of linear perspective, you keep going back to a small point at the back on the horizon. But I was sort of interested in crawling through the space in a way, and I sort of was thinking about this, this sort of tray, this breakfast tray, this disheveled breakfast tray as being sort of the focal point, and in a way sort of my vanishing point, and I would move back from that. It doesn't really add up in this particular drawing, but it's something that I was starting to think about a lot. I had just read Norman Bryson.
I want to explain also that for those who don't understand, this is the smoking room in the film Titanic from 1953, and Dawn stitched together various scenes so that you never see the entire smoking room in the actual movie. In fact, weren't you telling me there was a figure in one scene and you waited till the figure ducked down so that you...
That was from another drawing.
Another drawing, yeah. But there, in a way, we have a little bit of a retrospective here where there's this piece, which is Sumi ink. Will you talk about the folds and why this piece has so many folds? Explain that.
Yeah, I know it's a mess, but but really it's just part of my process. You actually, this piece is quite clean, and actually not folded. I mean, it's wavy because of the way that I glued it, but it's pretty tidy in a lot of ways. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And it's because I drew them all piece by piece, separately, and then I glued it together at the end. That is not a way that I ordinarily work. This is much more typical of the way that I work. And I start with one small thing. For instance, in this particular drawing, I just started doing a drawing of this. I did the red ink, and then on top of it, I drew this dark gray ink. And the piece was only this big. And then I thought, well, that's sort of a nice thing. Maybe I'll draw the whole thing. So I added on some paper, and so I just kept adding on. Then when I got to the end of this, I thought, oh, why don't I draw the hyacinth? And so I added on here, and the hyacinth, of course, got very big. And I mean, anyone, for all of you who live in Rome, you know that this is not really this big in real life. It's, you know, it's a little Christmas branch of berries. And so I just keep adding on as I go. And I'm working at a little table and working on a tabletop. And so when I do, I have to fold up the drawing in order to work on it. Because I don't work on the wall, I work flat on a table and sometimes working on my lap, and I have to make it this big even when it's that big. So,
But it's also a way of not being intimidated by the overall piece, is that right?
that's true, to be honest. I sometimes, you know, sometimes when I start out a piece and I think that it's going, and I know that it's going to be very big from the get-go, sometimes I find that a little intimidating, and so sometimes I just, it seems to work every time. I must be very stupid, but it just seems like I'm always able to trick myself into thinking I'm starting out making a small piece, but eventually it gets, you know, very big. But those stayed small, right?
Thank you.
So.
Before turning it over to questions that anybody might have, I just wanted to thank my assistants, who I could not have done this project without Sarah Brill, who also
Oh
made
my
the
God.
video, which is, she's been incredibly invaluable. And I know this video has a soundtrack that she didn't want to distract us, but it's a conversation that Sarah had, and I would urge all of you to be in touch with Sarah. Deanna Mellon, who gave her own invaluable contributions. Elisabetta Mauro, and I want to thank my wife Jeanette and Ben for welcoming Dawn into our home.
Julia.
And Julia, who is going to be helping us with a catalog that we're going to be producing, and it's her artistic project. So I wonder if anybody has any questions they would like to ask Dawn about any aspect of her work.
Anche in italiano.
See. Okay, also I wanted to mention that both Sarah and Elisabetta will be able to give a translation of what we've been saying. I apologize, it just slows it down too much if we translate as we're going. But you can approach them and... any questions? Yes?
I don't know, okay, faccio in italiano.
Sì, certo, e Sara fa una traduzione anch'io.
Non so la durata esatta del suo soggiorno qui a Roma, ma recentemente è stata
Sì,
inaugurata e chiusa una retrospettiva su tutta l'arte sui fiori, quindi stiamo parlando di Mario dei Fiori e grandi pittori, soprattutto romani, a Villa d'Este. Molto bella, volevo sapere se l'aveva vista perché ha chiuso praticamente intorno al 15 di dicembre.
Okay, Sarah, will you do the
Were you
translation?
here? There, unfortunately, in the middle of December, there had been a huge retrospective on artists, particularly a lot of Romans who had worked with flowers as their subject material, but I think era arrivata appena dopo che è chiusa la mostra, se ho capito bene.
But we
Rispondo io.
did go together to certain things such as Palazzo Farnese, which was an unusual treat, and many, many other things actually. And I mean, Rome seems to me a city of like doors opening and closing and little vistas and courtyards. Is there anything that surprised you? Hadn't been here since 1993, is that right? Was there anything that surprised you?
Well, the weather.
Oh God,
I feel so lucky.
the weather. I called Dawn every other day and said, I want to warn you, it can rain. And she said, I know you've said that. I said, but it could rain every day for 7 weeks straight while you're here. And then she comes here, it like barely rains, so.
Well, I don't know, for some reason when I travel, I love going to gardens, even though I'm a very bad gardener. I'm not a gardener at all. But, you know, I don't know, I really love it here so much, and I didn't remember. I mean, I remembered that I loved Rome from many years ago, but I didn't remember it this way. It's just a really, really beautiful city. And I love the people, and I just think that, you know, one thing that struck me, I was just talking to Kathleen, who's one of your waiters here, who's from RISD, who's a textile designer. We were talking about the same thing. Is that one thing that really struck me was the color in Rome and the colors that people wear, you know, and you know, in New York, everybody wears black, you know. In fact, it's really funny because you can be riding a bus in New York. I remember being on a bus in Brooklyn and, you know, riding the whole length of the whole trip, and it was a long ride, you know. And I remember looking at the bus and every single person on the bus was wearing black from head to toe, you know. I thought, wow, this is New York. I mean, people don't all wear black in America either. People wear a lot of kind of awful colors all over, you know.
Awful.
But in Rome, one of the things I notice is that the color here just seems very saturated, you know, like when you do purple, it's just purple, you know. And also, I just think that there's just such a feeling for the senses here, and that's another thing I noticed about fabrics too, is that there seems to be something so tactile about, I don't know, I guess, I don't know what to say, except I really love it here.
Any other questions?
I guess I would respond to that quickly and say you had mentioned in the past that you don't like drawing flowers. Is that what made them more attractive?
No, I don't like drawing flowers, you know. It's really funny because it's not something that I draw ordinarily. But they happened, you know, when I got here, I just sat down and I said, okay, time to draw, and I drew what was in front of me, and there were flowers, you know, these beautiful hyacinths that James had, you know, put in my room. And so I started to draw them, and then I drew them just to get started. And then I went to bed, and I said, I'll finish the drawing the next day. But then when I got up the next day to finish the drawing, this hyacinth, they grow so fast and they die very quickly too. They look the same, but I couldn't find my place in the drawing, you know. And I realized they just they're just growing so fast. I mean, these flowers are completely different now. And so when I drew this, the part of the thing about deciding to draw the flowers every day is that instead of me moving my point of view, the flowers were constantly going to be moving before my eyes. And so I said, I really want to do only one every day because I want them to change. And I want to be able to see how they live and die before my eyes. I want to see the whole lifespan of these. I mean, kind of like a vanitas painting. And you know, I mean, it could be, part of it could be a response to, you know, all the strata of years in Rome, but I think maybe just from a very personal point of view, I'm at a time of my life when I'm starting to really think about age in a very strong way, you know, and I think about young people and older people and life and death, and so I think these flowers really spoke to me, you know, in a personal way.
I guess maybe we'll close, but I was going to say one last comment is, it's intriguing to me that whether it's that still life of, is that a bedside table in your apartment?
No, that's my kitchen table.
The kitchen table, right. Or this, it seems like everything is in equal focus, as though you're in a state of amazement or almost like a meditative state. Do you feel that when you're creating works like this?
Well, you know, I was, this kind of goes back to the movies a little bit too, is that I remember once a long time ago, a film history teacher was talking about Citizen Kane and how there was a cinematographer, I'm trying to remember, was it James Wong Ho? Or Greg Toland, excuse me, Greg Toland, thank you. Who ground a special lens so that there would be a very deep, so that in the background you'd have a very deep focus, and in the foreground you'd also have you know, the same clarity. And I thought, and it really was such a wonderful thing to happen, you know, not just so that you could see foreground and background, but also all the stuff, you know, and all the material in the life of Citizen Kane, you know, sort of became a big part of the subject matter of the movie too. And so, you know, this one filmmaker also talked about it as being a sort of more democratic way for the viewer to read a frame as well. You know, it's like you weren't just focusing on a face and then everything went soft in the background. Instead, you know, your eye really had to look at every single part of it and decide to you know, travel, you know, on its own. It's interesting because this Gregory Crutzen, these new Gregory Crutzen photographs at Gagosian, I remember he was talking about that, you know, that really intense detail in the foreground, middle ground, and background, and that really appealed to me personally. But anyway.
Well, if there are no more questions, I thought maybe we'd close. I wanted to say, hopefully we'll have more of these and these events. If I don't have your email, then please sign in that kind of colorful flower notebook, and we can send you, I promise not too many, but notifications of future events. Thank you all once again for coming, and Dawn, thank you so much.
Thank you for being patient. Thank you so much. Thank you. Enjoy.
Okay,
Have a glass
enjoy.
of wine. Oh, good. Pardon me?